The fact that you were going to see movies without any subtitles in the '60s is kind of like blowing my mind.
Well,
Like I don't
the
think
reason
I've ever
why
seen
is partly had to do with the fact that this was, it was a kind of crazy decision, but a policy of Henri Langlois that not only would he show films without subtitles, but when there were silent films with intertitles, if he could show them without the intertitles, what they call flash titles, which means they appear on the screen so quickly you can't even read them, he would prefer to do that. He had this theory, that cinema is a visual medium and who cares what the characters are saying or but I mean, you could not follow the films, it's like, and I mean, you could appreciate certain things, but in terms of the plots and in terms of understanding what they were doing, I mean, I went with a friend who'd spent time in Russia who told me that, that there's some Stalinist propaganda in this film, but that's all I knew, and I didn't know what kind of Stalinist propaganda it was. And so, yeah, it's a problem, but I also thought I don't think it was, in other words, I think Langlois was wrong about that. He also was wrong about the fact that he wouldn't show silent films with musical accompaniment, because these were films that were designed to have musical accompaniment.
like none of them.
None of them, no,
Like
never.
not just Passionate Joan of Arc, but like you're watching like Buster Keaton with no music.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow. It,
And it was, again, a kind of purist point of view that, one could debate, and I did debate, and a lot of people complained, including me, about it. But it may have had to do partly with the fact that, there's so many issues that would be raised if you do have music, because like what's better, what's worse, do you try to get the original scores? If you can't, what kind do you use? Because, bad music is worse than no music at all with some of these silent films. And I've seen music with Buster Keaton that's so inattentive to the rhythms, of the visual rhythms, that it virtually destroys, like what's good about the film. So it's not a simple, these are not problems with simple solutions.
what would you say is the worst accompaniment you ever saw to a silent film? I'm kind of curious.
I'm sorry?
Oh, what would you say is the worst musical accompaniment you ever saw with a silent film, or like the most?
I remember that. I mean, well, there was that I saw, which was actually at a leading art cinema in London with Buster Keaton. But there was also, I think, I know a lot of people who love, in fact, a lot of young people love these kind of industrial music that goes with silent films. That's totally anachronistic. It has nothing to do with the way people were seeing the films at that time. And I really hate those type of scores, even though a lot of people like them, because it seems to me that it automatically removes you from the period, and puts you somewhere else. And I think it's very important to kind of get a sense of when it was made and how other people were seeing the film when it was made and so on. So I don't know. I think there are a lot of ways you could screw up a film, with the music. And, Langlois, I mean, the one thing that Langlois did, you see, which nobody else did as a programmer, and this is what made him great. This is what, when we talk about what produced the French New Wave, people are always saying, it was Cahiers du Cinéma, it was the critics there. But the critics were inspired by Langlois more than anybody else, because Langlois is somebody who would program all kinds of films together so that they rub shoulders with each other. So you would have an Otto Preminger film, followed by a Kenji Mizoguchi film, followed by, a Charlie Chaplin film. And the point is it was almost like all these filmmakers were sitting at the same table together, as if they were having a conversation. And that's that attitude towards these filmmakers of cinema, speaking to cinema, was something that was a basic factor in the French New Wave. And it came from Langlois. It came from that way of programming films, which nobody else was doing. So I think, and that was the first generation of filmmakers who really, in a deep way, were reflecting on film history in certain ways. And, it's very particularly apparent in the early films of Truffaut, as well as Godard and Rivette too. I mean, Rivette had a clip from Metropolis in his first feature, for example.
Right, you have some of the like earliest kind of sampling almost. in those movies, I feel like.
Sampling, but also critical reflection, because you see what the difference between the way the French New Wave or the better directors would use clips and so on is they would make critical, they had critical insights into these movies. Whereas when you get, you know, an homage to a Howard Hawks movie and a Peter Bogdanovich film or a Martin Scorsese film, or, you know, there's a lot of that in America. It's not critical commentary. It's almost like saying, you know, it's, or like, you know, when Paul Schrader gives you the plot of large portions of the plot of The Searchers in Taxi Driver, for example. I mean, he's not giving you a real critical commentary on The Searchers. He's just reproducing certain things.
He's kind of using it like a theme to extrapolate on other things, or sort of a. Or,
well, it almost becomes like a kind of real estate, you know, like I own this property, you know, because I'm quoting from it. You know, it just seems to me, it's really funny because I heard a story once that Paul Schrader went up to Godard at Telluride, festival I've never been to, and he said, I just want you to know that I took something from your film La Femme Mariée and used it in, I don't know, American Gigolo. And Godard said, it doesn't matter what you take. What matters is where you take it to. And I think that that's the difference, you know, in other words, between the way the Americans would cite things and the way and when the French did it, it was, to me, not in every case, because sometimes they would cite things the same way the Americans did. But it's like, or when Woody Allen, you know, imitates Bergman or Fellini or,
right.
You know, or Warren Beatty, you know, in Reds, you know, it's like, it just seems to me there's a kind of copycat thing, which is quite different from what was known as the homage, because they were critical homages that, well, I mean, a perfect example, what Godard would do is he would, in Weekend, he has a scene that actually combines one of the murders in Weekend, combines a shot from Psycho with a shot from Monsieur Verdoux. And those are both movies about murder equated with capitalism. You know, it's like that's what he's making a comment on. But if you just sort of like if you just reproduce the shot from Psycho without doing anything else, you're not making a comment about capitalism. You're making a comment about, I don't know, Hitchcock or about yourself.
You're kind of saying I saw Psycho, right? Like I think the most egregious example of that is like the end of the first Star Wars movie, where you have that almost exact lift from Triumph of the Will, but it doesn't seem to know what the hell it's doing with it.
Yeah, that's right. Except that you could talk about it being, I mean, I regard in certain ways Star Wars as a fascist film, but not in the same way, obviously, as Triumph of the Will. But it's still a film that convinced people that you could have something like a bloodless war. And like, I blame Star Wars on helping to create let's say, a public atmosphere for the Gulf Wars, because people thought, oh, it's really neat if we have, you know, these Gulf Wars, because it's like a video game, you know, it's not, which is a whole attitude that Star Wars helped to promote, where you don't see the blood anymore.
Right.
Whereas it seemed to me earlier wars, you were much more
no
aware of the blood. Now, of course, with drones, you're even less aware of, you know, the personal gore. So, yeah, anyway, I do think it's important. And, you know, when Godard said that when he made, you know, basically, when he made films, it was another way of writing criticism. And when he wrote criticism, it was another way of making cinema. I think that's important.